Hey everybody, Patrick Norton and Chastity Vicencio here for Signal by Sony, and today we're going to answer some of your questions about Sony's new A7R2 and RX cameras.
That's right. As Sony announced the new cameras, quite a few people posted questions about them on different blogs. And today we're here to take time to answer some of them. The first question comes from Engadget reader Chris Gamma, who commented, "If I'm buying an A7 series camera, where is the 120 frames per second 1080p video?"
Great question, Chris. My first thought is, do you really shoot that much slow motion video? Because if you do, you should probably be asking, what camera should I get for all the slow motion that I shoot? The A7 series delivers gorgeous 4K video even in low light conditions, and it can shoot 120 frames per second 720p video. That said, for really high frame rates, most photographers, or rather videographers, rent or buy special high rate cameras, which are rarely full frame as it becomes exponentially more difficult to record as sensor size increases. Right now, there isn't any full frame camera we know of that can shoot 1080p 120 frames per second. There are other options though. Sony's Action Cam, the FDR X1000V, can shoot full HD at 120p and 1280 by 720 at 240p, along with other popular point of view camera brands.
Now let's talk about the RX cameras.
So this one is from Engadget reader Curious, who asks, for a camera that's nearly $1,000, where is the phase detect autofocus?
Really good question. So in this case, the reason isn't a matter of price, but rather the camera category it falls into. So fixed lens or interchangeable lens. Fixed lens cameras like the RX camera line don't have separate dedicated AF sensors, so they don't have phase detection autofocus or PDAF. On-sensor PDAF is rarely, if ever, found in cameras using small area image sensors. Since autofocus with small sensors is much easier to achieve than with larger sensors, the advantage of having on-sensor PDAF is not quite so helpful here. It's actually also a bit more difficult to realize. As the pixels get smaller and smaller, it's more and more difficult to use them for phase detection, which almost always requires that part of the pixel is shaded. BF Skinner on DP Review asks, so when do actual orders tend to take place after the new camera announcement?
I feel this pain. I've seen HDTV ship more than 6 months after they were announced at CES. It's always torture when new cameras get announced, but you have to wait to get your hands on it. In this case, the wait isn't bad at all. Both the RX100 M4 and the RX10 M2 were announced in June, and orders are getting shipped to doorsteps in July for the RX100 M4 and around August for the RX10 M2. F. Weiler has a question that a lot of people ask: what frames per second can you set the slow-mo to?
Really good question. So a lot of people are talking about the slow motion capabilities of the new RX100 M4 and the RX10 M2. So up until now, high frame rate generally required post-processing. You could shoot it, but to play it back in slow motion at a different frame rate usually required a PC and some editing software. With the new RX models, it all happens in the camera. You shoot 2 to 4 seconds of high frame rate, HFR mode 240 frames per second to 960 frames per second, and the camera processes these frames into a video clip of 1920 by 1080 full HD at the frame rate you selected. So this makes high frame rates truly accessible. Just shoot and play. But for all the new slow-mo shooters out there, just 2 seconds of capture can result in more than a minute of slow motion playback. So here's a chart that shows the different options for frame rate. So anticipating and ultimately capturing that golden moment in the past required quite a bit of skill. But the RX has somewhat of a cheat function where that skill isn't needed. The end trigger function makes this easy. The camera continuously buffers high frame rates until you press the end trigger, just after you spot the moment, so you make sure that you don't miss it. Moving on to the A7R2, Eno commented on Imaging Resource saying, "I'm curious what type of readout is used for the full-frame 4K video A7R MK2. Is it line skipping or pixel binning or what?"
So when reading the full width of the sensor, A7R2 does not use any line skipping and all pictures are read, otherwise called direct pixel readout. However, since there are 36 megapixels being read, that's the 16:9 crop of the 42 megapixel sensor, for every frame of video, pixel binning is used to slightly reduce the amount of information handled by the processor. That means the A7R2 becomes the world's first camera that can read out and internally record 4K form in the full frame format. By contrast, the A7S could read out 4K from the full frame sensor with no line skipping and no pixel binning because there are only 8 megapixels to work with, but an A7S can't record 4K internally like the A7R2. The A7R2 also includes Super 35 mode, which reads a 15 megapixel crop of the sensor with no line skipping and no pixel binning, so people using it have a choice. On Cinema 5D, Miles T asks in a comment, how do you record audio on this camera? Is there some sort of XLR add-on? great question.
Really good question. So there's a wide range of options here. So in addition to Sony's multi-interface shoe microphones and the XLR models, Sony's professional UWP-D series of wireless UHF microphones can be used with the SMAD-P3 adapter, which connects to the MI shoe. In addition, there's an industry standard 3.5mm stereo mini jack for other manufacturers' microphones and XLR kits. All right, on to the next question. So Sir VVorgCo987 commented on a Gizmodo review of the A7R II saying, "My biggest problem with these reviews is that they never mention if the camera suffers from rolling shutter. I'd love to know if this is of any use to me when doing motion tracking and such visual effects."
So rolling shutter is largely determined by the read speed of the imager, so the highly accelerated output of the A7R II's imager realizes some really significant improvement. If you're looking for reviews of this, a few are just starting to appear on the web. Check the site News Shooter. They got their hands on an A7R II and published a first impressions review, which includes some insightful samples of A7R II rolling shutter performance, and it looks like they noted the full frame performance is very good.
Petroglyph, who posted on DP Review, "I noticed the specs say RAW ARW 2.3. Any significance to the version 2.3? Compression changes, for instance?" Well, these are actually the same. So ARW is just Sony's name for RAW files, so ARW equals RAW.
Our last question comes from Dustin, who posted on Imaging Resource that he was curious about the lowest ISO on both the A7R II and the RX100 M4 when in picture profile S-Log2, and that answer would be 800. That concludes today's Q&A video. To stay on top of everything Sony makes, do yourself a favor and check out the Signal by Sony channel.
For now, this is Chastity and Patrick saying see you next time. Bye.